Look it hot, make it sexy.
Make it hot, make it sexy. What's up, everybody? It's Real with Jordan and Demi.
Oh my God, I'm blushing.
I'm in LA. Demi's in New York. What's going on, Demi?
This is that was just like a little bit. That was like 1% of what Jordan has to deal with on a daily basis with me. Just 1%, like the extraness.
So Demi, who's on the show today?
We have Mark from Mudhoney. And if you're like an OG rock fan, you're gonna enjoy this one. We get real deep and we get real like personal and memories and all that.
Personal and memories. We get Mark Arm is the lead singer of Mudhoney, a band that started in the 80s in Seattle and was kind of like a proto grunge band that inspired bands like Nirvana. And so we talk about Mudhoney's career and about the early Seattle rock scene and his interaction with Kurt Cobain. Mudhoney was one of Kurt Cobain's favorite bands. So it's a real fun episode for those who are into rock history. Let's start with what's going on now. Let's start with the upcoming new album, Mark. I know that this was recorded in a sort of atypical way for a Mudhoney album. It was kind of invented in a different way. Can you kind of tell us about that? How this was put together?
Well, I mean, ever since Guy has been in the band, which was started in the early 2000s, we've all like had jobs and families and stuff, so we would learn our songs very well, rehearse them before going in the studio and just book a couple of days over a long weekend maybe and do it sort of piecemeal like that. And this time around, we just booked 9 days and we had a lot of like kind of half-baked ideas that we figured out in the studio instead of like being well rehearsed. And it kind of made for an interesting record, I think. I'm guessing.
Yeah. It definitely sounds different. Go ahead, Demi.
Well, one question I was really excited to ask you was, so I was telling my dad and stuff. I was like, oh my God, we're going to talk to Mudhoney today. And he was like, can you ask them about where we got this name from? Like, where did the name originate from?
Yeah, that's from a Russ Meyer movie.
Oh.
Yeah. It's in the Wikipedia. You know, Mark, speaking of Wikipedia, one thing that you mentioned that's mentioned in the press materials for this album is that you're kind of put off that Tom Herman doesn't have his own, the guitarist Tom Herman, not the football coach Tom Herman. Has his own.
I was completely unaware of the football coach.
Yeah. That's when you Google. Yeah. So for the uneducated or the people who don't know, can you explain who Tom Herman is and why he's so important to you?
He's like, a crucial member of the original lineup of, I guess everybody was a crucial member of the original lineup of Pere Ubu. And Peter Laffner, the other guitar player who kind of played on just a couple of the early singles, seems to get a lot of like credit, but the real cool stuff is Tom, I think. And Tom was the only guitarist for like the first 3 records. And that stuff is amazing. And he did stuff after he left Pere Ubu, like this band Tripod Jimmy, who were well regarded at the time. And he rejoined Pere Ubu in the mid 90s. And if you just go to if you look him up, there's very little presence.
Right.
And he's an amazing guitar player, super innovative. But maybe he doesn't give a shit.
And maybe he's not his own self-proclaimer or
yeah.
But and you guys, there's a song on the new album that's kind of an ode to him.
Yeah. Sure.
I really want to go back in time with you on just like the whole era. You guys are considered like monarchs of the grunge era, and
Monarchs. Oh man, that's a great word, Demi.
Rulers.
Yes. Well, I mean, that time, it's so precious, those moments in time where genres are being created, right? So I kind of want to know like what that felt like to kind of see all that happening, being one of the first success stories of Sub Pop, and what did that kind of just chaos and like excitement of being a rock band in that time feel like?
I don't know. It's just a kid growing up in the Seattle area and playing in bands with my friends and watching.
In the late 80s, in the 80s, I would imagine there wasn't any kind of like, this is the sound that's going to be popular in the next.
No, not by any means, and I feel like what we were doing was just part of what was happening in the American underground and also kind of like the Australian underground too at the same time.
Maybe
a little bit of the UK, but a lot of that stuff was a little poppier, except for like Spaceman 3.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you guys were, one thing about Mudhoney to me is that you guys, the kind of the thing that's being
look at the glass. Sorry to cut you off. Check that out. Glass in the house right now. Never before seen.
Never before seen.
So cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was just sorry about that, Demi. Didn't mean to cut you out there. But one thing I think about Mudhoney is that, the press, this new album is being promoted as very kind of diverse, and there's all different kinds of sounds and all stuff. But I always felt like Mudhoney was musically a mishmash of different rock styles. I hear like early 80s hardcore. I'm wearing a Minor Threat t-shirt right now. I felt like there was always sort of, you did whatever you wanted to do. Did you ever feel the inclination to make your sound more poppy to reach more people or anything like that? Or were you always just like, we're doing what we're going to do?
I feel like we like what we like. And if you look at our record collections, I would say like maybe 10% of the records are people who got really big, like Bowie, Alice Cooper, the rest of them are just like the Scientists and the Stooges and Feed Time. Things that didn't break through, even though they thought they might at the time. The MC5 or New York Dolls, New York Dolls, wow. I remember when I was in college, I worked at the University of Washington Library in the Copy Center. And there were times when it was completely dead, but they had like this treasure trove of old Rolling Stones. And so I would just read this stuff from like the early 70s, and it was almost as if they were giving the New York Dolls and the Eagles equal weight, which is
interesting,
kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, he would have. Yeah, I guess it was hard
because all these writers were from New York, right? So they're like, oh, the New York Dolls are,
Yeah. Yeah, we got some good. We had Thurston Moore on the show a while back, and he gave some really good insight about the early '80s in New York and all that kind of stuff. That was Demi's moment doing Thurston Moore. But
I know I just spilled some water on my face somehow.
It's all good. I really love talking to like the OGs because I mean. Right now, you may have already known is like this whole buzz, like rocks here, but like I really love to hear what the OGs, in rock music have to say about that time. Speaking of other bands, though, was there ever like, like how rappers have like their drama, like like East Coast versus West Coast? Was there ever like any kind of like band drama that you're like, no, like we don't associate with this band or like this band is like not?
Yeah, cool. Did you guys get along? Yeah,
were all the bands getting along?
For the most part, I mean, people have their own personalities and some people get along and don't get along, but there was never like, oh, we hate New York or whatever,
Yeah.
What about the dynamic within the band? Were you guys always, were you always like glued together and like cooperating as a unit? Or
I kind of feel like for the most part, we were. Obviously at one point, like Matt decided to leave the band. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Really, I mean,
there was no like behind the music, like throwing vases at each other or anything like that? You know,
No.
the volatility wasn't there.
You know, I did this. Steve and I did this side project called Monkey Wrench with Tim Kerr from the Big Boys. And I think he was really surprised that you mentioned, like, it's so weird that everyone just gets along so well. And we're like, yeah, we're in our 30s now. You know, It's not like we're like, I guess the Big Boys, they had like conflict and stuff. And and there was kind of that a little bit in Green River, like everyone has their like position of this is the kind of music I like and this is what I want to do. And it seems really important when you're in your like teens or early 20s. But over time, it's, okay, cool. You like the Beatles, I like the Stones, whatever. It's not a big deal.
Right. Yeah. Once the sort of grunge and the rock era took off in the 90s and you guys were like signed and you had the association with the Seattle sound, did your approach to making music change at all? Did you feel any kind of pressure to write something that would reach more people, or was it business as usual once you got into, yeah?
It was pretty much business as usual. Like we made a point of recording our first major label record in the same basement studio at Conrad Uno's house that we did the previous record at. Like we fought pretty hard to be able to keep doing what we wanted to do. And there was at the time, a lot of bands were getting into like, bidding wars or trying to like just get as much money as they can. And we intentionally told our lawyer who was helping to construct the deal to like, we don't want that. We don't want a big advance. We just want to be kind of left alone. And we got a really, we're one of, I think, the few bands that didn't have a horror story at a major label.
Yeah. Yeah, you did. Because my favorite album of yours might be Piece of Cake. I was looking through your discography and I love that. I feel like I'm a big transitional period kind of guy when it comes to bands. And I feel like that was like such a 90s record, but it had the spirit of like the early Mudhoney stuff. And that was like on a major label and everything. And that was 92. So that was right at the height of like the grunge era or whatever. So that's kind of what I was asking, was like specifically Piece of Cake. Did you have high hopes for that, or was there a push to get that to radio or anything like that? Like what was that album?
We didn't not want to be popular.
Yeah.
But we kind of, we're always really aware of our limited appeal. I'm not like the greatest singer in the world. I've got a thing I do, but I don't have like an 8-octave vocal range.
Like you, Demi. Demi is an 8-octave vocal range. Mariah Carey over here. Yeah.
One of my favorites is, well, a lot of people's favorites. Well, I can't speak for everyone else, but so Touch Me, I'm Sick. Okay. Can you tell us about the moment you wrote that song and how it all came together? And did you know that song was going to kind of like set people off the way it did?
No.
Really?
Steve wrote the riff for that, and I just came up with the words, I'm not even really sure what they completely mean. And at the time, we did this other song called Sweet Young Thing Ain't Sweet No More, and we put that on a single.
Love that song. Such a great intro. Anyway, keep going. Yeah.
We actually thought that was the A-side, and Touch Me, I'm Sick was the B-side.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not very good at, I don't know,
A&R.
Yeah,
Yeah, I understand that.
Do you remember recording that tune? Like the energy in the room?
I love the honesty. I love just that. You could have made up some story about like, yeah, we were in the recording. We knew you were like, no, I don't remember. I mean,
I remember the idea of it, but it was like 35 years ago.
Yeah. That whole
we were probably really drunk.
Oh, there you go.
the spirit of the time. Well, that whole that EP's become such a like a sort of an alternative tentpole in terms of the, when you list like the important alternative records, that's like up there. And so was it one of those that was recorded quickly and kind of, just kind of raw, or were you like, okay, guys, this is the one that people are going to hear, so we need to really concentrate? Like, what was the recording of that initial EP like?
Oh, we didn't have any money or anything, so everything was pretty quick and economical.
Yeah. And then sometimes that produces the best art because you have the constraints to work within.
Right. And we, over time, we learn not to overthink things in the studio. A lot of bands will just they'll spend days, if not weeks, on just going over this. Like
a mix.
A friend of ours who recorded us, Tucker Martine, was talking about another band that he'd worked with. And the guitar player put down the solo that Tucker thought was great, and then did 30 more tries. And basically ended up using the first one. So a lot of times your initial impulse is kind of the best one. And that's kind of that's the thing that we've gone with.
Yeah.
That's crazy. For people who don't know, I want to kind of talk about this a little bit. So there's punk and there's grunge, and there's kind of this fight between the two. That's not punk. This is whatever. What do you guys consider where you guys were at in your sound? And also, for anyone who doesn't know, can you explain kind of the difference in the two genres and kind of a little bit of the history?
That would be tough.
We have 3 more hours to record.
Well, let's start with, what do you guys consider your sound to be?
Did you even think yourself as a certain type of band?
We thought of ourselves like a punk rock influenced band. But that word was so broad by the mid 80s, where bands that I don't think now would be considered punk. They might be considered something like post-punk or whatever. But
yeah, post-punk was a thing that people retroactively like to slap on mid 80s.
Yeah, but in the same world as the Butthole Surfers and Sonic Youth, but also a more standard rock band like the Replacements, or Husker Du. We kind of felt like we were just part of a continuum that it kind of happened with punk rock through hardcore and bands like Scratch Acid.
Yeah. One thing I've enjoyed that's been consistent throughout your discography is that the guitars always feel unhinged. There's always there's feedback, there's fuzziness, there's just they're kind of, and even on the new record, all these years, 35 years later, you're still kind of you won't there's no the guitars aren't clean, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, the tones.
Do you have something against clean guitars? I mean, because this new album has some sort of has some solos going on. You got some wailing solos, but it's not going to sound like Boston or Styx or something. You never have had that clean guitar sound.
Yeah, it's never going to sound like Boston or Styx. I don't know. We've always just been really attracted to fuzz. Our first record was named after 2 distortion fuzz boxes. I have nothing against clean guitars. Some clean guitars sound great. And, every once in a while, I think there's a cleaner guitar sound on there. I'm trying to looking at the song titles right now.
I appreciate you looking for examples. That was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your guitar pedals of choice when it comes to distortion? Because there's a lot out right now. There's your Rat pedal, which we've seen the bass player Nirvana use famously. I mean, and now a lot of guitar players love that pedal to get that kind of that grit. What are your favorite distorted pedals?
A lot of pedals, and I'm constantly in the process of figuring out what my favorite is. The pedal that I have used the longest in the early 90s, Ibanez made a little thing called a 60s fuzz, and it was a crappy plastic box that broke really easily.
Mm.
And years ago now, I had a friend of mine who is good with a soldering gun, take the inner parts of that and put it in a metal box. And I've been playing that.
Oh, dope. So like saves it.
Yeah.
Demi's
cool.
taking notes. Demi's taking notes.
And a recent pedal that I use for a little less fuzz, but works good with feedback and also has a little bit of grit is the Sabra Cadabra pedal, which I think is supposed to make you sound like Tony Iommi. Doesn't quite, because there's no way you can sound like Tony Iommi. That's in his fingers.
Yeah.
But it does a pretty good approximation.
I guess you have to like do. I'm trying to do like a missing finger or something. That's a bad joke. I'll cut that
I'm
out.
just gonna saw off the tip of my finger.
Yeah, saw off top of your finger. Yeah, we're going deep into like Black Sabbath rock nerd stuff. While we still have, I do want to talk a little bit more about the new album. I know that quarantine affected the recording of this and the writing of this, and that there was sort of, you were kind of like almost stockpiling riffs or something. Like how did and it's a kind of a long album for these days, 13 tracks. So tell us about how you wrote these songs and how you recorded them, given the circumstances of not being able to come together like you normally would.
Well, before the pandemic hit, we had, amassed a couple of riffs here and there. So they were in our recording device in our practice place, which is in my basement at my house. So we didn't get together until like everyone had both doses of the initial shot of the vaccine. Guy, our bass player at the time, was working our bass player still, but at the time had been working in Harborview, which is a major trauma hospital in Seattle. So he was neck deep in the shit.
Wow.
He was for a while there the COVID coordinator for the nurses. So there, the rest of us, I think, had a little bit of fear of getting together with him because he was obviously exposed or around the virus, but he, the protocols that they had at Harborview were like great, and he never got it in the 2 years. The crazy thing is like once we did our first tour last spring, we all got it because we're playing in venues and people are just like unmasked right there, and everyone's breathing, even though we had like a vaccine requirement. But luckily no one got like incurably sick. But that kind of broke Guy's brain a little bit because he was like, I was in the thick of the shit for 2 years, never got COVID, and we play a couple of shows and because like people weren't still like kind of, everyone thought it was over.
Can we take it back to 93?
93.
So Time Machine. Okay, you guys did a 2-week tour with Nirvana, right? I'm pretty sure you've spoken about this before. And I mean, I just kind of want to know daily life. Like you wake up, you do a sound check. Like what was it? What's the real deal about being a rock band in that time on a tour like that with other bands and just the energy in general? And was it all kind of like what people glamorized touring to be in that era?
Well, they were on a bus.
What were you guys on?
In a van, like a 12-seater.
Oh, I thought you were going to say we were on a charter plane. Well, they were on a bus.
It was weird. It was a little weird, I mean, there was they were trying to keep Kurt sober. So there was no, they weren't allowed to have like beer backstage, but we had beer in our room. So like those guys, they'd all just come into our room and drink our beer.
Oh,
Oh hell no.
And beer wasn't Kurt's problem at the time.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. It was uncomfortable. It wasn't cool.
Were there any good moments from that tour that you remember?
That particular tour, no.
Oh wow.
But we hooked up with Pearl Jam a couple months later. And at the time, the perception, obviously very wrongly, was that like, you know, Nirvana was the band from the underground, the punk band, and Pearl Jam was like this major label band. And, you know, and if you look back to like I was in a band with Stone and Jeff, you know, before Mudhoney, and so was Steve. And Jeff had like done a fanzine, and he was in a hardcore band, and Stone played in a hardcore band for a hot minute before
Like real
Greenwood started.
Mm-hmm.
So that perception, which was at the time that they were like this major label sellout band, and Nirvana was the thing that grew organically out of the underground, was complete bullshit.
That was Music Press stuff, though. That was like Music Press. Music Press putting that on you. Yeah.
And then we were like, oh fuck, now we got it. This Nirvana tour was fucking terrible. It's just the way people around the band dealt with them, and it was kind of gross. And we're like, oh fuck, we have to do this Pearl Jam tour now. This is going to be terrible. And it turned out to be great.
Wow.
And it's because the band actually took control of things themselves instead of like had assholes surrounding them.
Right.
You know, so that was a lot of fun and really great to see. And I think the crazy thing was like we were did a couple nights in Boulder, and at the end of the shows at the time, like the audiences would just yell, Eddie, Eddie, Eddie. And Jeff was just like, yeah, it's been like this for a while. like the crowd didn't know anybody else in the band.
Yeah, it was just like Eddie and a bunch of guys playing guitar. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm curious about that, Mark. I'm not going to go into the whole, like, you know, the breakup of Green River and all this kind of stuff. But when Pearl Jam started having success, did you feel happy for those guys the guys that you knew, or were you kind of like, I wish that was us? No,
I mean, we were aware of what we sounded like, you know, and our appeal.
So you kind of embraced that you guys were like the underground band. I hate to say that word we just talked about that.
No, I think we are an underground band, and you know, wear that badge proudly. Yeah.
Nice. Well, do you have any, let's ask about you. Like what do you listen to now? Like, do you take time out to listen to music currently, or is it just kind of background, or what do you listen to?
I work in a warehouse at Sub Pop, and there's always like stuff playing.
Oh, okay. So you're like a Sub Pop. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your relationship with Sub Pop. What's that relationship been with for all these years? And why do you think that Mudhoney and you personally have formed that bond that's lasted so long?
Well, we're friends.
Sure.
And they're willing to hire me.
That's a good answer.
And they back our band, which is great.
Yeah. I think it's amazing.
I feel like we're in like an incredibly lucky position, you know, especially for a band that, you know, is an underground band. Like, we get to keep doing what we want to do.
And there's a lot about like sticking to your, you know, your genre. I feel like it's a very punk thing. And like people in the underground almost like don't want their heroes to be discovered by the masses, because then that means it's no longer theirs and like their group of friends. And like, you get what I'm saying? That's kind of like,
yeah, I think so. But I mean, you know, I'm not opposed to like living in a world where we're huge. I just don't. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, maybe there's like some other universe where that's a different thing, but.
Do you guys ever get big in a foreign country that surprised you? Where like, because I know that sometimes it'll be like all of a sudden you'll be big in Japan or Korea or Germany or something.
The first time we went to Brazil, that was really surprising.
What was
I
that?
hear the Brazilians get down.
Yeah. You know, because it's not a country where like there were huge record sales. And we would do like an in-store, and people would bring in CDRs that they just to sign with like Xerox covers.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Because it's a generally kind of a poor country, so a lot of people couldn't really afford to like buy the brand new thing off the shelf, and they would just like make copies of it for each other.
Did that bug you, or were you kind of?
I mean, I understand where they're coming from. You know, like, you got to eat, but you also want to listen to music.
Yeah. Demi, do you have any? While we still have Mark, do you have any? Do you have any Sonic Youth interaction questions?
Oh, interesting. Well, we did. Yeah. I mean, so for you guys that are watching and don't know, so around this time, there was Mudhoney and all of these amazing, like really dope alternative bands that were breaking their way through to like for your average person that maybe wasn't even into rock to discover, because they were being talked about and given some light, which is a really cool and special thing. And another one of those bands, aside from Nirvana and Sonic Youth, I mean, aside from Nirvana and Mudhoney, is Sonic Youth. And we had Thurston on the show. And was there any kind of interaction between you, Thurston, and Kim? And can you kind of give us a little insight on how they were back in that time?
Well, the very first time Sonic Youth came to Seattle in '85, I believe it was, the local promoter who put on the show asked Green River if we would open, because he knew that like Steve and I were like fans of the two records that were available at that time. And so Green River played with them like every time they came through town, and then like Mudhoney started playing with them every time they came through town, and they took us to the UK in 1989, which was huge. Like at that point, Sonic Youth was kind of like the tastemakers of the underground, and the previous band that they took with them to the UK was Dinosaur. Dinosaur Jr., I guess, by that point. So it was kind of like if Sonic Youth endorsed you, you know, people listened.
100, yeah.
You got the cool kid badge, you know.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing about rock, like music in general, is like that's what tends to happen with scenes and like bands that form. They kind of like, you know, team up in that way without like, maybe it's not spoken or intentional, but it is cool that like fans of one band can see like a, you know, an opener on tour and say, okay, like I'm interested in this too, and like be exposed in that way, which is really cool. What was that like being on the plane to the UK for that tour?
Do you remember that? I guess that'd be a long ass.
What was really surprising was how ape shit the crowds went just initially from the get-go.
Wow.
Despite the fact that, you know, we had just released our first record. I mean,
they knew it. They knew the first record.
The single had been out for a few months, and that was getting play on John Peel's radio show, and so yeah, it was crazy.
Oh my God.
Before we let you go, this is a really this is the last question, Mark, and we'll let you go. But you guys made a cameo in the movie Black Sheep. One thing that's about that people don't remember from that era is that during the early mid 90s, there were a lot of movies where there was a scene with a rock band. Even you mentioned Alice Cooper in Wayne's World. They go backstage, they meet Alice Cooper. And that was kind of a thing that like they wanted to appeal to, like, you know, the Gen X rockers was putting bands in movies. What do you remember about filming filming that movie? And did you have any interaction with Chris Farley and David Spade?
David Spade was not on set. Chris Farley was. He was hilarious and a really nice, gregarious guy. My biggest memory is that we walked away from that shoot without getting a SAG card because we played ourselves.
Oh. Were you looking for a SAG?
Like our acting careers never took off.
Yeah. You could have been you could have been a detective on Law and Order or something. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The craziest thing about it was like we had to film the scene where we play live, and we're just like kind of dreading this because we'd done videos before, and usually when you do a video, there's just like the whole crew and everyone's just not looking at you, trying to like not give any signals off. Well, and we're like, oh, this is going to be, they're putting us in front of actual real people to like mime along to our song. This is going to be like pulling teeth. And the thing that we didn't realize was that this audience was like all paid extras. And they went ape shit as if they liked what they were hearing.
But when you do that, you're miming the song. Are you even getting a playback like you would on a music video? Or?
Yeah.
Wild.
That's crazy. I just want to make a special shout out to the Reels Grunge Instagram page. They saw I posted yesterday that I was that we were going to be talking to you, and they were like, "Oh my God, like this is incredible! Like, can you shout us out? Like, it's a page dedicated to grunge music." And yeah, they just want to say hello, and they were so excited that we were talking to you today. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, is it wild to see? Yeah, Mark, what is it like to see this younger generation kind of embrace, 80s and 90s alternative? Have you seen that happen? Have you seen many younger fans interact with you? Yeah,
I mean, we did a European tour last fall and also like a US tour, COVID tour in the spring. And that it's great to see that we're just not playing to people our own age.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
that would be the most amazing. If I was a band, to having that second, third generation be into you would just be like, that would be such validation to me.
It's kind of affirming.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mark, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
The new album is out, Plastic Eternity. Go check it out. Mark Arm from Mudhoney, everybody. Thank you so much, Mark.
Sweet.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye, Mark.
That was amazing, Demi.
That was fire.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. I think it's funny that, when we do these interviews, we always want to talk about their current project. That's the reason they're doing interviews in the first place, because they're promoting whatever thing. And I think it's funny that we try to get him to talk about the new album. He's like, it's kind of boring, like the recording, and he was all about telling
just being humble.
80s, 90s. So, which is funny because we had the same, when we interviewed Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth, we kind of had the same trepidation, was that we were like, we wanted to talk about current projects.
Wild, yeah.
And he wanted to talk about,
he's more excited to talk about
the glory days. Yeah. So I think that's fun when you have someone who's been out there for a long time and they love talking about, the whole Black Sheep story at the end there about being on the movie set. That was fun.
That's some cool insight right there.
Yeah. I would be, if I was a guitarist like you, like I would be pumped up right now and wanting to go play something, but that's just me.
I mean, yeah, I think I'm gonna just go turn on some Mudhoney after this. And
right.
The way he said he didn't remember.
Yeah. That's gonna be you in 30 years. It's gonna be like,
Jordan.
You remember when you like recorded that song with Garzi, and you'll be like, I kind of remember it. Like,
oh man.
Yeah, I remember making a music video with Victoria, but
Victoria, shout out Victoria. We love Victoria Coniful.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, guys, that'll be it for us. As always, go to popdust.com for the latest in pop culture and music news, and stream past episodes of It's Real with Jordan Demi on YouTube and Facebook, wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, we'll see you later.